The azaleas were blooming, a riot of pink against the meticulously manicured green of my lawn that I'd deliberately chosen a shade just a hair brighter than the HOA guidelines specified, a tiny act of rebellion that, I suspected, already had Brenda's perfectly sculpted eyebrows twitching behind her net curtains 2 doors down. That I knew Brenda, everyone in the Harmony Glades knew Brenda. She was the self-appointed guardian of suburban conformity, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, and a talking encyclopedia of petty grievances. But what Brenda didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the man diligently weeding his flower beds, humming along to the classic rock station on his portable radio, was anything but ordinary. My name is Alex, and for the past 3 months, Harmony Glades wasn't just my residence, it was my assignment. Undercover work demands a certain neutrality. A blank canvas onto which others can project their assumptions. That I'd cultivated the image of a slightly nerdy, slightly awkward software developer, recently divorced and looking for a quiet life. That I wore sensible shoes, drove a beige sedan, and made a point of knowing the names of all the neighborhood dogs. This wasn't my first rodeo. I've been deep undercover before, immersed in worlds of drug cartels and white-collar crime, but Harmony Glades, it felt almost absurd, yet, the directive was clear. Investigate suspected embezzlement and corruption within the Harmony Glades Homeowners Association. Apparently, a whistleblower had contacted the Bureau with allegations of misused funds, rigged contractor bids, and shady dealings involving landscaping contracts. The Bureau doesn't typically get involved in HOA squabbles, but the sums of money involved were significant, and the potential for wider implications, links to organized crime, perhaps, couldn't be ignored. So here I was, Special Agent Alex Ramsey, trading my Glock for garden shears and my Kevlar vest for a khaki vest. My cover story was airtight, my background meticulously crafted. That I'd even taken a crash course in suburban landscaping, learning the difference between petunias and pansies, the proper pH balance for hydrangeas, and the optimal time to fertilize Bermuda grass. The details mattered. One wrong move, one misplaced flower, could blow my cover. It wasn't just about blending in, it was about observing. Undercover work is 90% observation, 10% action. That I was a silent recorder, absorbing every detail, every nuance of Harmony Glades life, the forced smiles at the monthly HOA meetings, the hushed whispers behind manicured hedges, the competitive spirit that permeated everything from holiday decorations to lawn maintenance. That I noticed the way Brenda's eyes lingered a little too long on the contractor's invoices during the HOA meetings. That I overheard snippets of conversations hinting at secret deals and backroom agreements. That I saw the subtle shifts in power dynamics, the way Brenda wielded her influence with an almost gleeful sense of control. The key, I learned, was to be present without being noticed. To be the fly on the wall, the shadow in the corner, the unassuming neighbor who was always there, but never truly seen. That I mastered the art of the casual conversation, the seemingly innocuous question that yielded valuable information. "Oh, that's a lovely new patio, Mrs. Henderson. Did the HOA approve the contractor?" "Those new security cameras are certainly impressive, Mr. Peterson. Who decided on the specifications?" The details, seemingly insignificant on their own, began to paint a picture. A picture of Brenda at the center, pulling the strings, manipulating the system for her own benefit, and the more I observed, the more I realized that this wasn't just about embezzled funds. It was about power, control, and the intoxicating allure of absolute authority in a small, meticulously planned community. And Brenda, it seemed, was addicted. The azaleas, by the way, were doing wonderfully, just as planned. Brenda Thompson, the name alone could curdle milk. She was a force of nature, a whirlwind of perfectly coiffed hair, designer handbags, and thinly veiled condescension. If Harmony Glades had a constitution, Brenda would have written it, ratified it, and then found a way to amend it to her own benefit. She was the self-proclaimed protector of property values, the arbiter of good taste, and the bane of anyone who dared to deviate from her vision of suburban perfection. She wasn't just the HOA president, she was the HOA. The other board members were mere puppets, nodding along to her pronouncements, afraid to cross her lest they face the wrath of her carefully curated social network and her encyclopedic knowledge of the HOA bylaws. Brenda had a rule for everything, from the acceptable height of hedges to the permissible shade of beige for exterior paint. And woe betide anyone who dared to transgress. Her days were spent patrolling the neighborhood in her golf cart, a veritable mobile command center equipped with a clipboard, a measuring tape, and a withering glare that could melt steel. she documented every infraction, no matter how minor, with the zeal of a seasoned detective. A misplaced garbage can, a slightly overgrown lawn, a child's bicycle left unattended on the sidewalk. All offenses worthy of a formal warning, a hefty fine, or, in extreme cases, a personal visit from Brenda herself. These visits were legendary. Brenda would arrive at your doorstep, clipboard in hand, a smug expression plastered across her face, ready to unleash a torrent of meticulously documented grievances. She spoke in a clipped, condescending tone, peppered with phrases like, "It has come to our attention," and, "in violation of Section 3, subsection B, paragraph 12. She never raised her voice, but her words were like tiny daggers, meticulously crafted to pierce your pride and leave you feeling utterly humiliated. She relished the power she wielded, the ability to dictate the lives of her neighbors, to enforce her own brand of suburban tyranny. It wasn't about the rules themselves, it was about the control. It was about reminding everyone that she was in charge, that she was the gatekeeper of Harmony Glades, and that their comfort, their happiness, their very existence within this meticulously planned community, was subject to her approval. Of course, Brenda's own life was a carefully constructed facade of perfection. Her house was impeccably maintained, her lawn was always perfectly manicured, her flower beds were a riot of color, all meticulously arranged according to the latest trends in suburban landscaping. She hosted lavish cocktail parties, attended by the neighborhood elite, where she held court, dispensing gossip and pronouncements with equal measure. But beneath the surface of polished perfection, I sensed a deep insecurity, a desperate need for validation. Her relentless pursuit of order and control was, I suspected, a way to compensate for the chaos in her own life. A failed marriage, a strained relationship with her children, rumors of financial difficulties, these were the whispers that circulated behind her back, the secrets that she desperately tried to conceal behind her meticulously constructed facade. And that, I realized, was her weakness, her need to control, her desire for validation, her fear of exposure. These were the vulnerabilities that I could exploit, the pressure points that I could use to unravel her carefully constructed world. My slightly too bright azaleas were just the beginning. The plan was already in motion, and Brenda, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing on the horizon, was about to walk right into it. After all, every queen eventually falls, and in Harmony Glades, the fall was going to be spectacular. The stage was set, the players were in place, and the curtain was about to rise on the final act of Brenda Thompson's reign. The first shot across the bow came in the form of a pastel pink notice, slipped discreetly into my mailbox. Notice of violation, it declared in bold, sans serif font, followed by a paragraph citing Section 7, subsection C, paragraph 22 of the Harmony Glades HOA bylaws, excessive greenery. Excessive greenery. I almost choked on my morning coffee. Apparently, my lawn, in its vibrant, meticulously fertilized state, was deemed to be detrimental to the overall aesthetic harmony of the community. The nerve. I knew, of course, that this was Brenda's doing. She'd probably been lurking behind her net curtains, squinting at my lawn with a mixture of envy and disapproval. It was a power play, a subtle reminder that even the smallest deviation from her vision of perfection would not go unnoticed. I responded with a carefully worded email, expressing my sincere apologies for the excessive greenery, and promising to rectify the situation immediately. I even included a link to a scholarly article on the psychological benefits of green spaces. I knew it would irritate her, but the excessive greenery was just the beginning. The violations escalated in both frequency and absurdity. Next came the improper trash can placement. Notice, apparently, my trash can, a standard issue gray plastic bin, was positioned outside the designated enclosure zone, for a period exceeding the permissible 5-minute grace period on trash collection days. This was followed by a warning about unapproved decorative elements. The offending item, a small, solar-powered gnome that I'd placed discreetly among my petunias. Brenda claimed it was inconsistent with the overall architectural style of the neighborhood. Each violation was accompanied by a passive-aggressive note, dripping with saccharine politeness and veiled threats of escalating fines and legal action. Brenda was clearly enjoying herself. She was testing me, probing my defenses, trying to see how far she could push me. I played along, of course. I feigned exasperation, frustration, and a healthy dose of suburban bewilderment. I dutifully moved my trash can, removed the offending gnome, and even considered replacing my vibrant green lawn with a more subdued, HOA-approved shade of beige. Inside, however, I was carefully documenting everything. Each notice, each email, each interaction with Brenda was meticulously recorded, catalogued, and filed away. This wasn't just about investigating embezzlement. It was about building a case against Brenda for abuse of power and harassment that I started to notice a pattern. The violations always seemed to coincide with moments when I was getting close to uncovering something important. A conversation with a disgruntled contractor, a hushed whisper overheard at the clubhouse, a suspicious transaction on the HOA bank statement. Each time I stumbled upon a potential lead, Brenda would suddenly appear with a new violation, a subtle reminder to back off. It was a clumsy tactic, but effective. It created a sense of unease, a feeling that I was being watched, that my every move was being scrutinized. It was designed to intimidate me, to make me question my own sanity, to drive me out of Harmony Glades. But Brenda underestimated me. She thought I was just another suburban pushover, another victim to be bullied and controlled. She didn't realize that I was trained to withstand far worse than a few petty HOA violations. In fact, her escalating harassment was only fueling my determination to expose her. Each ridiculous violation was another piece of evidence, another nail in her coffin. And with each passing day, I felt the net closing in. The truth was about to come out, and Brenda Thompson was about to learn that messing with an undercover FBI agent was a very, very bad idea. The gnome, by the way, was back in the petunias. I figured it was worth another pastel pink notice. The key to any successful undercover operation is maintaining the illusion, and in Harmony Glades, that meant playing the part of the perpetually bewildered, slightly exasperated resident struggling to navigate the labyrinthine world of HOA regulations. Each time Brenda issued a new violation, I responded with a carefully crafted performance of compliance and frustration. I'd sigh dramatically, roll my eyes, when she wasn't looking, of course, and launch into a series of questions designed to highlight the absurdity of the situation while simultaneously eliciting information. "Oh, Brenda, I'm so sorry about the trash can. I thought I had it within the designated enclosure zone, but I must have misjudged the spatial parameters. Could you perhaps provide a diagram illustrating the precise boundaries of the zone? And what is the penalty for exceeding the 5-minute grace period? Is it a fixed fine, or is it calculated on a sliding scale based on the duration of the infraction?" These questions served a dual purpose. First, they reinforced my image as a slightly clueless, but ultimately well-meaning resident. Second, they forced Brenda to articulate the rules and regulations in excruciating detail, often revealing inconsistencies and ambiguities in the process. It was during one of these exchanges, while discussing the proper placement of seasonal decorations, that I noticed a subtle shift in Brenda's demeanor. She seemed flustered, hesitant, almost nervous. I pressed her further, asking about the specific guidelines for holiday lighting, the permitted size of inflatable decorations, and the process for obtaining HOA approval for special events. Her answers became increasingly vague, her explanations increasingly convoluted. She stammered, contradicted herself, and eventually cut the conversation short, claiming she had another urgent matter to attend to. That was my first real breakthrough. I realized that Brenda wasn't just enforcing the rules, she was using them as a smokescreen to conceal something else, and the more I probed, the more I suspected that something else was financial malfeasance. I started attending every HOA meeting, meticulously scrutinizing the financial reports, asking pointed questions about contractor bids, and requesting detailed breakdowns of expenses. I made sure to phrase my questions in a non-threatening way, always emphasizing my desire to better understand the financial health of our community. But Brenda wasn't fooled. She knew I was onto something, and she responded with increasing hostility and defensiveness. She tried to shut me down, to silence me, to discredit me in front of the other residents. "Alex, I appreciate your interest in the HOA's finances, but I assure you that everything is in order. We have a professional accounting firm that handles all of our financial matters. Perhaps you should focus on maintaining your lawn." The veiled threat was unmistakable, but I refused to be intimidated. I continued to attend the meetings, to ask questions, to dig deeper, and slowly but surely, I began to uncover a pattern of irregularities, inflated invoices, phantom contractors, unexplained expenses, and suspicious transfers of funds. The evidence was mounting. Brenda was skimming money from the HOA coffers, using her position of power to enrich herself at the expense of her neighbors. The next step was to gather irrefutable proof, evidence that would stand up in court, and for that, I needed to get closer to Brenda, To gain her trust, to infiltrate her inner circle. It was a risky move, but I had no other choice. The game was about to change, and Brenda Thompson was about to face her worst nightmare. A neighbor who wasn't afraid to play dirty. The gnome, by the way, was now sporting a tiny Santa hat, just to keep things interesting. The infiltration of Brenda's inner circle proved surprisingly easy. It turned out all it took was a well-timed compliment on her prize-winning roses, a donation to her favorite charity, a suspiciously obscure organization with ties to one of the phantom contractors, and a strategically placed sob story about my recent divorce. Brenda, it seemed, was starved for genuine connection, or at least for the illusion of it. She welcomed me into her world with open arms, inviting me to her exclusive cocktail parties, confiding in me about her difficult children, and even seeking my advice. On her latest landscaping project I played the part of the sympathetic confidant, nodding attentively, offering words of encouragement, and subtly steering the conversations towards topics of interest to my investigation. I learned about her financial struggles, her strained relationships, and her deep-seated resentment towards anyone who threatened her authority. It was during one of these intimate gatherings that I finally obtained the smoking gun I needed, a copy of a falsified invoice, hidden among Brenda's personal files. It was proof positive of her embezzlement, and it was enough to bring her down, but Brenda, sensing that the walls were closing in, decided to launch a preemptive strike. She orchestrated a special meeting of the HOA board, ostensibly to discuss ongoing concerns regarding property value maintenance. But the real agenda was clear: to publicly humiliate me and have me evicted from Harmony Glades. The meeting was held in the clubhouse, a sterile, brightly lit room that felt more like a dentist's office than a community gathering space. The air was thick with tension, and the faces of the other residents were a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Brenda, resplendent in a power suit and a pair of designer stilettos, took her place at the head of the table, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of triumph and malice. She launched into a lengthy diatribe about the importance of upholding community standards, the need to protect property values, and the dangers of allowing undesirable elements to infiltrate Harmony Glades. She then turned her attention to me, her voice dripping with condescension. "Alex," she said, "it has come to the attention of the board that you have repeatedly violated the HOA bylaws, disregarded community standards, and generally conducted yourself in a manner that is detrimental to the well-being of our neighborhood." She proceeded to list my supposed infractions, each one more ridiculous than the last: the excessive greenery, the improper trash placement, the unapproved decorative elements. They were all trotted out as evidence of my egregious disregard for the rules. But then she went too far. She accused me of being a disruptive influence, a troublemaker, and a threat to the harmony of our community. She claimed that my presence was causing undue stress and anxiety among the residents, and that my continued occupancy of my home was untenable. Therefore, she declared, her voice rising in a crescendo of self-righteous indignation, I move that the board vote to initiate eviction proceedings against Mr. Ramsey, effective immediately. A gasp went through the room. The other residents looked at me with a mixture of shock and pity. I could see the fear in their eyes. They knew that Brenda was ruthless, that she was willing to do anything to maintain her power. Brenda, basking in the attention, leaned back in her chair, a smug smile playing on her lips. "I have the full support of the board," she said, her voice dripping with arrogance. "This vote is a mere formality. You're finished, Alex. You never belonged here in the first place." She paused, savoring the moment. "You see, Alex, in Harmony Glades, I am the law." It was a fatal mistake. She had revealed her true colors, exposed her arrogance, and openly gloated about her abuse of power, and in doing so, she had sealed her own fate. The gnome, by the way, was now wearing a tiny judge's robe and gavel. The irony was delicious. Brenda's words hung in the air, thick with arrogance and self-satisfaction. The other board members, like obedient puppets, nodded in agreement, their faces betraying a mixture of fear and relief. They were finally rid of the troublemaker, the outsider who dared to question their authority. I let the silence linger for a moment, allowing Brenda to fully savor her victory. Then, I smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile, or a nervous smile, or even a sarcastic smile. It was a knowing smile, the kind of smile that sends a chill down your spine. "Brenda," I said, my voice calm and steady, "you've made a grave miscalculation." Her smug expression faltered, replaced by a flicker of unease. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice losing its confident edge. You see, Brenda, I continued, you're right about one thing, that I don't belong here, that I'm not just some disgruntled resident complaining about trash can placement and garden gnomes. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my cell phone. The room fell silent, all eyes fixed on me. I dialed a pre-programmed number, a number that had been etched into my memory for the past 3 months. "This is Ramsey," I said into the phone, my voice clear and authoritative. "It's time." The line went silent for a moment, then a voice crackled through the speaker. "Understood, Agent Ramsey, initiating Operation Azalea Bloom." Brenda's face paled, the other board members exchanged nervous glances. They knew something was about to happen, but they didn't know what. I hung up the phone and looked directly at Brenda, my eyes locking onto hers. "Brenda Thompson," I said, my voice ringing with authority, "you are under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and abuse of power." Confusion, disbelief, and then finally, dawning horror washed over her face. "What? This is ridiculous, you can't do this," she sputtered, her voice trembling. "Oh, but I can," I replied, a hint of amusement in my voice. "You see, Brenda, I'm not just a neighbor. I'm Special Agent Alex Ramsey, with the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The room erupted in chaos, the other residents gasped, whispered, and pointed. The board members scrambled to their feet, their faces contorted with panic. Brenda, however, remained frozen in her chair, her eyes wide with disbelief. "FBI, this is a joke, right? You're trying to scare me." "Afraid not, Brenda," I said, rising to my feet. "We've been investigating you and your little HOA scheme for the past 3 months. We have evidence of your embezzlement, your fraudulent activities, and your abuse of power. We have witnesses, documents, and recordings. We have everything we need to put you away for a very long time." As if on cue, a fleet of black SUVs pulled up outside the clubhouse, their sirens wailing. A team of FBI agents, clad in dark suits and carrying assault rifles, stormed into the room, their faces grim and determined. "FBI, freeze, everyone stay where you are," one of the agents shouted, his voice booming through the clubhouse. The agents quickly secured the room, handcuffing the board members and confiscating their cell phones. They then turned their attention to Brenda, who was still sitting in her chair, her face a mask of shock and disbelief. "Brenda Thompson, you have the right to remain silent," one of the agents said, reading her Miranda rights. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As the agents led Brenda out of the clubhouse in handcuffs, a collective gasp went through the room. The residents of Harmony Glade stared in stunned silence, their faces a mixture of disbelief, shock, and a dawning realization of the truth. The gnome, by the way, was now wearing a tiny FBI badge. Justice, it seemed, had finally arrived in Harmony Glades. The arrival of the FBI agents was like a scene ripped straight from a movie. The screech of tires, the flashing lights, the stern faces, the unmistakable air of authority. It was a stark contrast to the carefully curated suburban tranquility of Harmony Glades. Brenda's shock was palpable, her carefully constructed world, her illusion of control, shattered before her very eyes. The woman who had ruled Harmony Glades with an iron fist, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, was reduced to a trembling, bewildered figure, struggling to comprehend the reality unfolding around her. The other residents were equally stunned. They had witnessed Brenda's petty tyranny for years, but they had never imagined that it would lead to this. They had seen her as a powerful, untouchable figure, someone to be feared and obeyed. Now, they saw her being led away in handcuffs, her power stripped away, her reputation in tatters. As the agents secured the clubhouse and began questioning the board members, I took a moment to address the remaining residents, my voice calm and reassuring. "I know this is a shock," I said, "but I want to assure you that the FBI is here to help. We have been investigating allegations of corruption within the HOA for the past 3 months. We have uncovered evidence of embezzlement, fraud, and abuse of power. We are here to ensure that justice is served and that the community of Harmony Glades is protected." I explained that the investigation was ongoing and that the agents would be interviewing each resident to gather further information. I urged them to cooperate fully and to come forward with any information they might have, no matter how small or insignificant it might seem. "This is your community," I said. "You have the right to live in a safe, fair, and transparent environment. We are here to help you reclaim that right." I could see the relief in their faces, the sense of hope that had been extinguished by Brenda's reign of terror. They had been living in fear, afraid to speak out, afraid to challenge her authority. Now, they saw that there was a way out, that they could finally break free from her control. The FBI agents worked efficiently and professionally, interviewing witnesses, collecting evidence, and securing documents. They were a well-oiled machine, trained to handle even the most complex and sensitive investigations. As they worked, the details of Brenda's scheme began to emerge. She had been embezzling funds from the HOA for years, using the money to pay for lavish vacations, designer clothes, and other personal expenses. She had been rigging contractor bids, awarding contracts to her friends and associates in exchange for kickbacks. She had been abusing her power, intimidating and harassing anyone who dared to question her authority. The evidence was overwhelming, and the case against Brenda was airtight. She was facing multiple federal charges, and she was likely to spend a significant amount of time in prison. As the agents wrapped up their investigation and prepared to leave Harmony Glades, I took one last look at the clubhouse, the sterile, brightly lit room that had been the scene of so much drama. The air was still thick with tension, but there was also a sense of hope, a feeling that things were finally going to change. The reign of Brenda Thompson was over, and Harmony Glades could finally begin to heal. The gnome, by the way, was now holding a tiny American flag. Freedom, it seemed, had finally come to Harmony Glades. The final reckoning was at hand. The arrest of Brenda Thompson was a spectacle unlike anything Harmony Glades had ever witnessed. As she was led away in handcuffs, her face a mask of fury and humiliation, the residents watched in stunned silence. The woman who had wielded so much power, who had dictated their lives with such impunity, was now being treated like a common criminal. The charges against her were extensive and damning: embezzlement of HOA funds, fraud related to contractor bids, abuse of power in the enforcement of HOA regulations, and conspiracy to obstruct a federal investigation. Each charge carried a potential sentence of years in prison, and the combined weight of the accusations was enough to crush even the most hardened criminal. But Brenda wasn't the only one in trouble. The other members of the HOA board were also under intense scrutiny. While they hadn't been directly involved in the embezzlement scheme, they had knowingly turned a blind eye to Brenda's activities, allowing her to operate with impunity. The FBI agents questioned each board member extensively, probing their knowledge of Brenda's activities, their involvement in HOA decisions, and their relationships with contractors and vendors. The interviews were tense and uncomfortable, and the agents left no stone unturned in their pursuit of the truth. Some of the board members claimed ignorance, insisting that they had been unaware of Brenda's wrongdoing. Others admitted to suspecting something was amiss but had been too afraid to speak out, fearing Brenda's wrath. Still others offered vague excuses, claiming that they had simply trusted Brenda's judgment and had not wanted to cause trouble. But the FBI agents were not buying it. They had reviewed the HOA's financial records, interviewed numerous witnesses, and gathered a mountain of evidence that painted a clear picture of corruption and complicity. It soon became clear that several of the board members were more deeply involved than they had initially admitted. They had received kickbacks from contractors, accepted gifts and favors from Brenda, and actively participated in her scheme to defraud the HOA. As the investigation progressed, the board members began to turn on each other, each trying to shift the blame and protect themselves from prosecution. Accusations flew, alliances crumbled, and the once unified front of the HOA board dissolved into a chaotic mess of finger-pointing and recriminations. The FBI agents carefully documented each statement, each accusation, and each denial. They were building a case not only against Brenda but also against the other members of the board who had enabled her reign of terror. It was a long and arduous process, but the agents were determined to bring justice to Harmony Glades. They knew that the residents had suffered for too long under Brenda's tyranny, and they were committed to ensuring that those responsible were held accountable. As the sun set over Harmony Glades, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns and perfectly trimmed hedges, the FBI agents continued their work, piecing together the puzzle of corruption and deceit that had plagued the community for so long. The gnome, by the way, was now surrounded by tiny yellow caution tape. The scene was a stark reminder of the chaos and disruption that had descended upon Harmony Glades, but it was also a symbol of hope, a sign that justice was finally being served. The aftermath of Brenda's arrest was nothing short of chaotic. The meticulously ordered world of Harmony Glades was thrown into disarray, its carefully constructed facade of suburban perfection shattered beyond repair. the revelation of Brenda's corruption sent shockwaves through the community. Residents who had once blindly trusted her leadership now questioned everything she had ever done. Doubts and suspicion spread like wildfire, poisoning relationships and eroding the sense of community that had once defined Harmony Glades. The HOA board, already reeling from the FBI investigation, was plunged into a state of crisis. Several members, fearing prosecution or public humiliation, immediately resigned, leaving the remaining members to grapple with the fallout of Brenda's actions. The resignations triggered a domino effect, as residents who had previously been intimidated by Brenda's power now felt emboldened to demand accountability. They called for a complete audit of the HOA's finances, an investigation into past decisions, and a reform of the HOA bylaws to prevent future abuses of power. The remaining board members, overwhelmed by the demands and facing mounting pressure from the community, were unable to cope with the situation. They lacked the leadership skills, the financial expertise, and the public trust necessary to navigate the crisis. The HOA meetings, once sparsely attended and dominated by Brenda's pronouncements, became raucous and contentious affairs, filled with angry accusations, heated debates, and demands for answers. Residents who had previously been silent now found their voices, expressing their outrage and demanding justice. The investigation into past decisions revealed a pattern of mismanagement, favoritism, and self-dealing that extended far beyond Brenda's embezzlement scheme. Contractors who had been awarded lucrative contracts without competitive bidding were forced to defend their prices and their qualifications. Residents who had been unfairly fined or harassed by Brenda came forward with their stories, seeking redress for their grievances. The chaos within the HOA spilled over into the wider community. Neighbor turned against neighbor, friendships dissolved, and the once harmonious atmosphere of Harmony Glades was replaced by a climate of suspicion and animosity. The carefully manicured lawns and perfectly trimmed hedges, once symbols of suburban pride, now seemed like monuments to a bygone era, a reminder of the superficiality and conformity that had allowed Brenda's corruption to flourish. The residents of Harmony Glades were forced to confront the uncomfortable truth that their community had been built on a foundation of lies, deceit, and unchecked power. They realized that they had been complicit in Brenda's corruption, allowing her to operate with impunity by turning a blind eye to her abuses of power. The road to recovery would be long and difficult. But the residents of Harmony Glades were determined to rebuild their community, to create a new foundation based on transparency, accountability, and mutual respect. They knew that they could never fully erase the stain of Brenda's corruption, but they were committed to learning from their mistakes and creating a better future for themselves and their neighbors. The gnome, by the way, had been removed from my lawn, a symbolic gesture of cleansing and renewal. Harmony Glades was finally ready to move on. Or so they thought. With Brenda behind bars and the HOA in the process of rebuilding, my assignment in Harmony Glades was officially over. The evidence had been collected, the perpetrators had been apprehended, and the community had begun the long and arduous process of healing. My work was done. There was no fanfare, no farewell party, no hero's welcome. That's not how undercover work operates. I simply packed my bags, loaded them into my beige sedan, and quietly drove away, leaving Harmony Glades behind. I left no trace of my true identity, no mementos, no lingering reminders of my presence. The neighbors knew me as Alex Ramsey, the nerdy software developer with a slightly too green lawn and a penchant for solar-powered gnomes. They would never know that I was actually Special Agent Alex Ramsey, the undercover FBI agent who had brought down their corrupt HOA president. As I drove away, I glanced back at the Harmony Glades sign, the same sign that had greeted me 3 months earlier. It seemed different now. Somehow, the manicured landscaping seemed less pristine, the perfectly symmetrical letters less imposing. The sign, like the community it represented, had been stripped of its illusions, revealing the cracks and imperfections that lay beneath the surface. I left behind a community stunned by the revelation of Brenda's true nature. They would spend years, perhaps decades, piecing together the puzzle of her deception, trying to understand how someone they had trusted could have betrayed them so completely. They would question their own judgment, their own complicity, their own values. They would grapple with the uncomfortable truth that they had allowed Brenda's corruption to flourish by turning a blind eye to her abuses of power. But I also left behind a community determined to reform, to rebuild, to create a better future for themselves and their neighbors. They had learned a valuable lesson about the dangers of unchecked power, the importance of transparency and accountability, and the need to stand up for what is right, even when it is difficult. The new HOA board, elected by a landslide vote, was committed to transparency and accountability. They instituted strict financial controls, implemented a competitive bidding process for all contracts, and established a system for residents to report suspected wrongdoing. Without fear of retaliation, they also reached out to the residents who had been unfairly targeted by Brenda, offering apologies, restitution, and a commitment to ensure that such abuses would never happen again. Slowly but surely, Harmony Glades began to heal. The community came together, mending fences, building bridges, and forging a new sense of unity based on shared values and mutual respect. The lawns were still manicured, the hedges were still trimmed, and the houses were still painted in HOA-approved colors, but beneath the surface of suburban conformity, there was a newfound sense of authenticity, a recognition that true community is not about perfection, but about connection, compassion, and a commitment to justice. As for me, I simply disappeared, fading back into the shadows, ready to take on my next assignment. That I never revealed my true identity to anyone in Harmony Glades, and I never looked back to why time there was over, but I like to think that I left a lasting impact, a reminder that even in the most seemingly ordinary communities, there is always the potential for corruption, and that it is up to each and every one of us to stand up for what is right, to challenge injustice, and to protect the values that we hold dear. The gnome, I heard, mysteriously reappeared on the lawn of the new HOA president. A silent sentinel, perhaps, a reminder of the events that had transpired in Harmony Glades, and a promise, perhaps, that such things would never happen again. Years passed that I moved on to other assignments, other undercover operations, other communities in need of my particular brand of suburban intervention, but I never forgot Harmony Glades. Every now and then, I would check in with my contacts at the bureau, just to see how things were progressing. The news, for the most part, was encouraging. Brenda Thompson's trial was a media circus, a spectacle that captivated the nation. The details of her embezzlement scheme, her abuse of power, and her petty tyranny were splashed across the headlines, turning her into a symbol of suburban corruption and HOA overreach. She pleaded not guilty, of course, claiming that she was the victim of a political witch hunt, a scapegoat for the failings of the HOA system, but the evidence against her was overwhelming, and the jury saw through her lies. After a lengthy trial, she was found guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, a harsh punishment that sent a clear message to other would-be HOA tyrants: abuse your power, and you will pay the price. Several of the other HOA board members were also prosecuted, though their sentences were less severe. They were found guilty of conspiracy and aiding and abetting Brenda's crimes, and they were sentenced to probation, community service, and hefty fines. The Harmony Glades Homeowners Association underwent a complete restructuring. The old bylaws were scrapped, and new ones were drafted, emphasizing transparency, accountability, and resident participation. The new HOA board was composed of dedicated and ethical individuals, committed to serving the best interests of the community. They instituted strict financial controls, implemented a competitive bidding process for all contracts, and established a system for residents to report suspected wrongdoing without fear of retaliation. They also created a community outreach program, designed to foster a sense of unity and cooperation among the residents. They organized neighborhood picnics, block parties, and volunteer events, bringing people together and building bridges across the divisions that had plagued Harmony Glades for so long. Slowly but surely, Harmony Glades began to heal. The community came together, mending fences, building bridges, and forging a new sense of unity based on shared values and mutual respect. The lawns were still manicured, the hedges were still trimmed, and the houses were still painted in HOA-approved colors, but beneath the surface of suburban conformity, there was a newfound sense of authenticity, a recognition that true community is not about perfection, but about connection, compassion, and a commitment to justice. And what about the gnome? Well, that's a story for another time. But let's just say that it continued to pop up in unexpected places, a silent sentinel, a whimsical reminder of the events that had transpired in Harmony Glades. As for me, I continued my work, moving from community to community, exposing corruption, fighting injustice, and helping people reclaim their power. It's a tough job, but someone has to do it, and I'm proud to play my part in making the world a little bit better, one HOA at a time. After all, even in the most seemingly ordinary places, there is always the potential for extraordinary change, and sometimes, all it takes is a little bit of intervention. The end.